You're listening to Across the Pondcast. Cybersecurity rants and war stories from both sides of the Atlantic.
Hello and welcome to Across the Pondcast, a show where we talk and occasionally rant about cybersecurity topics with perspectives from both sides of the Atlantic. I am Tib3rius. I'm joined, as always, by my number one co-host, Mr. Andy Swift, who's moving around right now. Andy, how are you doing?
I'm sorry, I forgot to sit still. I'm fine, thank you.
I literally, before I hit record, I was like, are you seated comfortably, Swift? And you were like, I am seated. And and then immediately as I'm doing the intro, you just start moving around, making noise.
Turns out I wasn't seated comfortably, okay? Ease.
You just lie to me.
It's lies.
You sit on a throne of lies.
Do you know what? I've been sent that gift 3 times this week. Really halfway through the week. So, well, no, it's Thursday now, so yeah, I'll see how many times I can crack it in. But yeah, I lie. That's perfect. But no, I am okay. Thank you, darling, for asking. How are you?
That's all right. Yeah, I'm pretty good. I can't remember if this is the first episode I've recorded after moving to Chicago. I think it is.
Yes, and your background suspiciously has stayed the same.
Yes, no reason for that.
Yeah, I think it is your first one in the new building. That's good. Quieter.
So if the audio sounds a little different, it's because I haven't figured out the EQ yet. But yeah, should be fun.
Your audio sounds the same. There's just distinctly less things going on in the background, like the occasional chainsaw noise or siren going past.
I did live on a very busy main road. And now I live in quite a nice sort of, not gated community, but it's like an apartment community. So it's, very nice. But it's also very cold. Very, very cold here.
Yeah, it's basically winter all the time there, is it not? It's,
no. But when it is winter, it gets very cold.
Yeah, you can no longer tease me about UK weather.
It doesn't rain as often. Like nowhere in America, other than Seattle. If you're someone in the UK and you come to America and you feel homesick, just go to Seattle. That's all I can say. Seattle, I've been to Seattle once and it reminded me of the UK so much.
I was about to say, hey, we've had like quite warm and dry weather recently, then I looked outside and it's literally raining now. So yeah, indefensible. Anyway, what are we here to talk about?
Well, the title of today's episode is Our Greatest Hits. Yes, we're going to be talking about some of the best vulnerabilities we have ever found on pen tests. Both of us have had long careers, we've found tons of cool things, and now we get to share them.
Perfect.
But before we start, this show is made possible thanks to our sponsors. If you want to sponsor an episode, please send an email to sponsors@acrossthepondcast.net for more details. All right, who's going to go first? Because we both have like 2 or 3 stories, depending on how long each one takes. This episode, I don't know. We're trying to aim for an hour. But who goes first, Swift? Do you want to take the first one?
No, I'll let you. But mainly because you came very prepared for this, and I didn't.
Well, you were saying like before we even started recording, with web apps, it's like sometimes slightly easier to come up with like good stories because web apps are generally pretty bespoke, right? Like a lot of the web apps I test are coded specifically by the company we're testing, whereas with network pen testing, it's like a Windows domain. So you're always usually dealing with Microsoft stuff. So, and you'll find different things, but a lot of like the configuration issues or the Active Directory issues are kind of similar. So unless you find something ridiculous, which I have on an internal before actually, found a whole network drive full of PowerShell scripts that had all the Active Directory domain admin passwords in them. And just hard-coded passwords, and they're like, oh, what is this? Oh, now we're running this as a domain admin. Great. Like, you can have that kind of stuff. But yeah, a lot of the findings, I feel, for internal tests are pretty, like, similar. Would you agree?
You find weird stuff all the time, but the route to compromising is often it's often not set in stone, but there are things that just work reliably every time, repeatedly as well. It's almost like turning up for a web app test and just like expecting to find SQL injection every time you do a test. There's like repeatable themes, especially because most of the world runs Windows domains. So I mean, there's a lot of repeatable, well-known vulnerabilities, exploits, and methods of lateral movement within that realm that are just so easy. You almost do them blindfolded and get into a routine doing internal testing where you turn certain tools on, you start looking for certain things almost by default straight away, and then you have the time to focus the rest of your test on the things that are unique to that network. So ultimately it's going to be the most interesting thing. But yeah, maybe less scope for more like interesting things, but definitely lots of scope for lots of ridiculous things and repeated things. You mentioned passwords there. I've got another one that I can add into that bucket as well, which is instead of just finding them on shares, this is post-domain compromise at this stage. So we're just rifling through different users and things like that, and we noticed that in the description field for every single user, the admin had put the password in the description field. It's like, you can't make this stuff up. It's just like stuff you find on Hack the Box. But this admin had gone through, and it turns out admin in air quotes, because the guy wasn't really even like an IT admin. He had just been kind of promoted into this role, and he was in charge of suddenly like Active Directory without any kind of qualifications or awareness, and he thought it would just be fine to put passwords he set as people's initial passwords into the description field for everyone. It's like, well, no. It's even like checkboxes when you set users up to help you avoid that exact situation. Anyway, alas, crazy stuff. But yes, do you want to go first? Because I think you've got the longest stories out of the two of us, and you even warned me about one of them before this, saying it might take quite a long time. So
I'm going to leave that one to the end.
Okay.
Because firstly, keeps people listening, but also it's a good sort of. I don't want to use the word climax, but I'm going to use the word climax.
Oh, please do.
So it's a good climax story. So yeah, but I'll talk about. So obviously, I'm going to preface all of these by saying, I'm not mentioning customers. I might, if it's relevant, mention the type of application or type of company, right? And in this case, this story, this was a financial services company. So, already dealing with very sensitive data.
Indeed.
And this specific application I was testing it wasn't necessarily, it was sort of linked to they had like an SSO platform, and it was sort of, I want to make sure I'm not going to reveal anything, but it was for sort of a conference they were running, but it's sort of tied into their main platform. So you would authenticate to their main platform, and then you would go to this conference site where you could register, buy tickets to the conference, etc. It's one of those corporate conventions. And so I was testing this, and honestly, like, most of the application was fine. Like, there were a few weird, probably security misconfiguration issues, as there are, but mostly it was okay. And I was testing, and I noticed okay, we had this profile that I could edit. You had the regular field, username, avatar, like bio stuff. That was all good. I could edit everything apart from the avatar on the actual main site. To edit the avatar, like, it went off to like the SSO page for some reason. So I messaged them. I was like, hey, can I should I test like the avatar upload stuff? Because it is technically on another site, but it is, technically it's part of this, right? And they were like, yeah, test that as well. So I'm like, okay, cool. And so the avatar upload, I remember this. It was like a 2-phase process. So you would obviously upload an avatar, click like submit, and you would see in Burp, right, the request to upload the actual image would go, and it would sort of push it off to the server, and the server would respond with a URL. And that was an S3 bucket. That's actually pretty standard way of storing any kind of file these days, is just push it to an S3 bucket. And so after that was returned, the application would then take that and submit that as submit that URL in another request using like a JSON object. So it'd be like, user avatar : and then the URL, right? And that would be it. So it's two phases. First request uploads the file, gets a URL. Second request sets the URL to the profile. Very, very simple. And so obviously I played around with the upload bit, but it's uploading to an S3 bucket. The S3 bucket was actually relatively well protected. It was using signatures and everything. That's fine. And then I looked at the actual saving of the URL, specifically the response, because all the JSON in the request had was like user avatar, right, as a key, and then the URL. The response was a JSON object, and it had all the user details. It had the username, email, right, first name, last name, user avatar, a user level set to 1.
Oh,
what's user level? That's interesting. And actually, was it user? I don't think it might have been user level. I think actually it was admin level. I think it was even more explicit. I think it was actually admin level. And it might have just been 0. So this was a very long time ago. This is like almost 3 or 4 years ago now. So it may have just been admin level. And so I was like, oh, interesting. Admin level 0. And obviously my user is not an admin. My user is just a regular consumer of this application. But whenever I have like I'm submitting a JSON object to an application and the application is responding with another JSON object that has more data than I've set, like any web app tester will know, okay, maybe you should just try taking one of those values, putting it in the original JSON object, and seeing if you can change any of those values in the response. So I took admin level. Let's just say it's admin level. I took admin level, :0, put it in the request. And remember, this is still the set avatar request, basically. Put it in the request, change the number 0 to a 1. Click submit. And in the JSON response that comes back, lo and behold, admin level 1. This is a bug known as a mass assignment. It's actually relatively common these days. I think it's more common than people expect because of the way that a lot of applications are coded, usually using model view controller. So the problem with models is, models are great, but one of the problems with them is generally by default in these setups, you can just update every single field. So you have to explicitly say, hey, don't do that. I only want these fields to be updatable. So yeah. But, so now I've got this user who was admin level 0, and now they're admin level 1. But I don't know, I refresh the page, nothing's changed, right? Like, sometimes you expect, like, oh, there's like an admin link in the top right.
Welcome,
like,
admin.
No, it's not, right? It's not that simple. But so then I just start, okay, well, if I am an admin user, there must be an admin panel somewhere. So I just start, like, going to the URLs that are in scope and just putting /admin on them, and lo and behold, one of them loads an admin page, and
Excellent.
I think the first page had a list of all the users, like admin users, and there's my account, and I found out admin level wasn't just it wasn't like a Boolean, like a 0, like a false 0, 1 true. For whether you're an admin, it was like specific levels of administrator. And so I was looking, and there was like a bunch of 1s, there was 2s, there was 3s, and so I didn't put this in the screenshot in the report, but sometimes we mess around with screenshots. I mean, Swift's done lots of XSS cows in the past.
Oh,
but
relief.
I just for a laugh and for a personal screenshot, I did set my admin level to 1337.
Nice.
And then took a screenshot because it was sorted like with the higher admin levels at the top of the list. So I had at some point, probably on an old work laptop, a screenshot of me at the top of this list of admins with admin level 1337.
What a brilliant screenshot.
Yeah. But yeah, so obviously this was, fairly critical. So immediately messaged the customer. And I just think you remember this was near the end of the day. And the customer, like, they were obviously panicky with, I would imagine you would be, because I explained what I was able to do in an email. Not in any detail, but I'm like, hey, I was able to just like get an admin account Like anyone can become an admin in your application. They're like, oh damn. So I remember I think the call was at 10 p.m. So they scrambled, and in a few hours we're able to get like the relevant people on a call at like 10 p.m. that evening, which, ordinarily we don't do calls at 10 p.m., but I felt bad. So I was like, yeah, I can jump on a call at 10 p.m. That's perfectly understandable, because I was testing in production as well. This was their production site. I don't think I mentioned that before. So yeah, I distinctly remember. So I showed them the bug, and they were like, obviously, impressed, but also like annoyed.
I hate that awkward moment when you show a client something, and like the technical client on the other end, sometimes it's just like, yeah, that's really good. I really like that. But you've seriously screwed my weekend. It's like a mixture of absolute joy and absolute panic at the same time. It's a beautiful thing to behold.
Yeah. And I do remember this is sort of the main developer was on the call. And sometimes obviously with developers in web apps, sometimes you can really annoy them because you're basically sort of just kicking their baby. But I remember, like, they looked at it. I don't remember if they sighed or not, but I remember what they described the vulnerability as. They said, that's probably the worst vulnerability I've seen in 20 years of developing. But they were happy. They were happy that I'd found it. I think when I mentioned mass assignment, they knew what I was talking about. So that was good. And yeah, that's just such a fun finding, because it was such an innocuous little like file upload sort of set user avatar functionality. But it just goes to show, like, the weirdest little endpoints can just open up these huge issues. And yeah, just the ability to update to your admin level in the application. And like, to be granted, like, if they hadn't been leaking the admin level, that's not necessarily something you can find without code review, right? This is the thing. Like, if that admin level is hidden as a value, yes, there are like extensions that will fuzz for different parameters you could update, and maybe it would find it. But even if you were able to set the admin level via like a fuzzing attack, there was no visible difference in the application, right? So you have to find that without knowing there's an admin level field. You would have to fuzz the user avatar request with different keys in the JSON, and then after you've fuzzed everything, try and go to /admin, which is just not going to happen in most tests. Like, there are so many things we test for, but yeah. so it was like, I think it also just goes to show that, the recon stage is so important as well. Knowing what the application actually might have at the back end, and also just code review. Like, code review is such a good tool. I think there are definitely vulnerabilities that you just literally cannot find without code review, unless they've made some misconfiguration, like revealing that there's an admin level in a response somewhere. But yeah, that's my first story.
I think we discussed that before about code reviews on one of the other episodes, maybe like the scoping episode or something like that. I think we discussed about like web app scoping and things like bringing code reviews into some of those scopes. I think it's becoming more and more important, especially for sort of the world we live in now, where it's not always humans making code now either, which is it's further going to sort of muddy waters.
Damn clankers.
Aye. So yeah, I think code reviews just become more and more important, to be honest. Yeah. Someone said on X the other day, like, here's one of those kind of clickbaity ones of like scare a vibe coder in like one word or a couple of words, and like someone just wrote back with like code review, like, oh no. Absolutely, for sure.
It's okay, the vibe coders don't know what that means.
No. Perfect. That's it does make a lot of assumptions, like you've uploaded your code to like Git or something like that, so someone can actually review stuff. But anyway, I've got a story. It is an infrastructure story. It's a little bit different. Yeah, like we said at the beginning, there's a lot of things in infrastructure that are repeatable, and there's a lot of things you do see occasionally that are just plain stupid. And a lot of the plain stupidity often comes down to things like segregation or separation of duty within various places around networks. So, back into the dark ages, a large corporation who shall remain nameless for obvious freaking reasons but lots and lots of nodes on the environment. And touching on a point you mentioned about recon being super, super important. Yeah, I know it's kind of like the boring and unglamorous part of it, probably second only to like the reporting stages of testing, I guess. Everyone wants to just pop shells, and that's a bit that's glamorous in the middle. But recon is important, and it's the most important thing, getting the lay of the land, whether it's a web app, whether it's an environment, whether it's like a huge corpo environment, or just like a small little couple of servers in a rack. Knowing the lay of the land is just the most important thing you can ever do. It's why so many of the courses focus on it. Like the beginning and the first thing they tell you all the time is recon, recon, recon. So absolutely. And one of the things I liked doing, I went through a phase of really liking NetBIOS. It was like I was obsessed with it for a period of time. And what I liked about it is there's a nice little feature of it where you can, if you're doing NetBIOS scanning, you can basically get it to return via a NetBIOS query its hostname as well, attached to its IP address, which is quite nice because then you can do things that are pretty nice for identifying things like dual-honed devices or devices that are attached to two networks at the same time. So to give an example of that, what we ended up doing was writing a little script that would just basically run essentially what would be equivalent of an MBT scan across the entire network, request all of these hosts to push back things like host names, or note down things like the IP addresses and MAC addresses that they're coming from. So then we can do within the script a nice little lookup that goes MAC address, is it from the same vendor, is it the same sort of device, and then look at things like IP addresses, ranges they sit in, subnets they sit in, are they sort of similar, are they different, and then look at things like the host names and then go, well, are the host names the same? If the host names are the same, you then sort of work out that, oh, it's probably the same host, it's just attached to like a docking station or something and the Wi-Fi at the same time. And that opens up the floodgates just to all sorts of questions. So when you run that over the network and you end up with all of these hosts returned and you're like, oh god, there's like 20 odd of these hosts that are dual honed, same host name, but we've got two different IP addresses that sit in two different VLANs. Why? What's going on there? So you start peeling that back and you look at it and you go, well, one's a Wi-Fi VLAN and one is the actual internal network that they're running. So what we then found out is this particular client had been plugging these laptops into docking stations that they had just bought. And then as soon as they plug into the docking station, their workstations were going away and grabbing an Ethernet IP address for the internal network, as well as them still being connected to the Wi-Fi. So they weren't sort of turning one off or the other. But the problem with this was that internally, that's fine. Wi-Fi is a different story because Wi-Fi is accessible outside of the building. So we then started doing a little bit of test against their Wi-Fi just to identify what exactly was available. We then found out that there was a lot of public Wi-Fi there, as in not passworded at all, that a lot of these laptops were connected to. And then you end up with this horrible bridge where you've got these devices that's sitting in a public domain of network and then an internal domain of network. And so we thought, okay, well, just to prove this point and make this even worse, we'll just go and sit out in our car in a car park and just take one of our massive antennas out of our bag and just attach to the network via Wi-Fi and just prove the point and just go, well, see if we can compromise any of these devices. We found two things that were very interesting from this Wi-Fi experiment of sitting in the car. The client was like, where are you going? I was like, with these antennas in hand.
Go to lunch.
Don't mind me. We will be back soon. I'm just going to go sit in my car. Like, okay. What? Didn't look suspect at all. Just sat in the car, just with an antenna hanging out the window. But it was great because we found two things. The first thing was that looking through all of these laptops attached to this free public Wi-Fi that we could just scan without any interference or problem, we found that a number of these devices had words in the host name like dev or dev01 or stuff like that. And we're like, oh, there's one thing you don't want to be on a public Wi-Fi, it's probably a developer's laptop for numerous reasons. So we started looking at what these laptops had on them, and two of them had port 80 open on them. And when you browse to port 80 on those devices, they had log files. Lots and lots of log files, Tib3rius. Like, unbelievable amounts of log files. All for a web application they were developing. It was an in-house system they used for handling billing for their clients. and again, I won't say what it is, so I might be being a bit liberal with the term clients, but yeah, so their clients, shall we say, who needed to pay bills, they had this application that they were developing in-house, and these developers were responsible for it. They had all of these logs sat on a web server exposed on the Wi-Fi. And do you know, Tib3, what these log files had within them?
Usernames and passwords. That's my guess.
Almost. Yes. Almost. Usernames. Yes. Session cookies.
Oh no.
Huzzah.
Okay, that's worse. That's somehow worse.
Session cookies.
Like, it's already authenticated. Just
yeah. With obscenely large expiry time.
No.
So yeah, we ended up just in a situation where we could just nick some of these. We waited for like an admin log to appear, or I think we just browsed one in the end, just hoping there was one from like the last half a day or something. We managed to find a admin and a cookie, and off we went. Found the application and internet facing application as well. So yeah, all we had to do was craft up a little post request with the username and a session cookie. Fantastic.
That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. The secondary problem with this was more of an infrastructure problem, and that was this public Wi-Fi. We actually thought, oh no, it can't be that bad. There's obviously a reason they're connecting to two networks, right? Maybe there's one thing that's accessible from the other. Nope. No, turns out you could ping the domain controllers from the Wi-Fi.
Oh no.
They're internal domain controllers as well. So yeah, it's an absolute disaster of a test. They had no segregation between their Wi-Fi, but their internal corporate Wi-Fi, which was WPA2, the public Wi-Fi, and the internal network. I mean, you could just ping internal domain controllers from the car park, which is just absolutely absurd.
You could ping them, but could you like connect to them?
You could see ports open, so you could see LDAP ports and DNS ports open. So yeah, but we didn't get to a stage of domain compromise just yet. At that point in time, we obviously got with a network topology like that. I mean, it wasn't long after that we got the domain admin, but. Yeah, I mean, feasibly at that point in time, if we had credentials at that point in time, we could have authenticated and gone through.
That's funny.
Yeah, just absolutely ridiculous. But all of it spurs from them adding so much new stuff into their network in a short period of time. So they had just added all these docking stations all around, and they hadn't set up any configuration to basically tell anything locally that if you're connected to one, you shouldn't be connected to the other. Hadn't written any scripting to handle that logic, or told people that's not a great idea. And then with the domain controllers, the Wi-Fi was also, they had introduced a whole new Wi-Fi setup where they had these fancy controllers where they could segregate things like public Wi-Fi from their regular corporate Wi-Fi. But they had just forgotten to like configure it properly. And so they just enabled routed through to their internal domain. And it's just a mess. I think, listening to the client at the time, they got a big investment, a big chunk of money to go out and just buy stuff, which, IT teams are often quite underfunded usually. When you get a big budget like that and you like to go and spend stuff, it usually happens quite quickly. So I think we probably just got in at the opportune moment where there was a lot of stuff undiscovered and unconfigured or poorly configured. It had just been plugged in by an intern or something. But yeah, a really cool one. I loved it. It produced one of the biggest reports I think we've ever written at our company. So yeah, anyway, really exciting stuff. So now we've got through, that's one of my stories, and I'm waiting for your big climax at the end. So we've done the foreplay so far. Let's call it that.
Before I bring us to climax. There's no other way of phrasing that. Like before I bring us to climax.
There's no other way of phrasing that. Are you sure?
There absolutely is.
That's our only option.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll go with it.
We're gonna make this an Andy sandwich. So,
Jesus.
I started us off. I'm going to end it. Swift, you are the meat of the sandwich. Let's do it. Let's hear a second amazing finding from you.
I feel like these analogies are not getting any better as we go along, are they? I don't think they're getting
This episode's going to be marked explicit on Spotify.
Yeah. Sorry. Right, yeah, I'll do another one. And I'm going to stick with the theme of like ridiculous stuff plugged into things that it probably shouldn't be, which is another innuendo. I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say, the way you said that.
Name of your sex tape.
My next story is don't put things into random holes.
I've got a good story about that as well, actually. Save that for another episode. Maybe we should call another episode, but just call it Things I Shouldn't Put in Holes. And just you watch the viewers like rocket at that one.
Oh, God.
So, so things that shouldn't be plugged into other things. IPMI interfaces. I want to talk about those because not a lot of people give that much care and attention. And for those of you who are experienced in things like infrastructure testing, you would have seen this time and time again and just gone, oh yeah, that'll stick. And then for some people, it seems to remain some kind of mysterious protocol on stuff that just people have never heard of for some reason. So it seems to be a real divide on who finds and exploits this stuff and who doesn't. But IPMI interfaces, think of them as the equivalent of lights out interfaces. They are lights out interfaces almost. They're for, specifically, if you don't know, giving you access to servers when all other access has died. So you often find them on things like hypervisors. Often the functionality is very similar to very basic physical tin kind of functionality, like turn off, turn on, reboot the physical hardware, and that sort of stuff. Occasionally, however, those IPMI interfaces are paired with lights out interfaces as well, which have pretty web GUIs on them, so a bit more up your street, but they tend to share things like the same authentication systems, the same passwords, usernames, which is really handy, especially when people leave defaults enabled, or you can, in some cases, in certain versions of IPMI, query it and get things like very crackable hashes returned back to you, which you can very easily pull apart and use to authenticate to things like the web GUIs. So yeah, long story short, on an internal test we were doing, we found, bear in mind we're plugged into like the main office VLAN, sat in a nice corner of a nice comfy office somewhere, and we found loads of these lights out and IPMI interfaces all over the place, which should not really be plugged into a regular office LAN. And I still don't understand why people do them, because if you look at the back of a server, you have distinct network ports that are used for plugging in for networking on network interfaces, labeled as such. And then you have, at the other end of the device, usually another little interface called ILO, or lights out, or something else, that is meant to go into a different management network, or a different VLAN, or some other place that is not your main corporate network. Yet you can guarantee that, like most internal networks you go to, you will end up finding some kind of configuration somewhere where someone has geniusly plugged this into the internal network. And I still don't understand why people do it, beyond not understanding or not having got a management VLAN configured or a management network configured or something like that. You see them all over the place. So once we got control over this interface, we found out that this vendor to vendor, they have different functionality. Some of them are very basic functionality of just turn off, reboot, that sort of stuff. Some of them have the ability to mount disks through them as well, or ISOs. So we found one such one where you can mount an ISO on it. And we worked out it was a development platform that no one was particularly using at the moment. So it's a development hypervisor. No one was particularly using it. I should caveat that we knew that as a fact because we have the network admin sat next to us. We could query him just to make sure what we're about to do is not mental. Because this stuff there's a line you don't cross when pen testing on an internal, and putting ISOs into a device to boot to a live instance so you can rip stuff off disks is usually not an accepted thing to do, just because of the disruption you'll end up causing. So don't go all yeehaw and go away and just do this without permission. If you are going to do it, make sure you've got someone, the network admin's grace, like permission to actually go and do this sort of attack. But we managed to mount an ISO directly to the hypervisor and then boot into this live image where we could just extract things from various disks. We just took all of the VMTK files off of a server, and we just basically took them away, extracted them, mounted them somewhere else, managed to get loads of credentials out of those servers, and later on we just managed to go and authenticate to them. So they were all things like virtual domain controllers, there were file servers, there were even print servers and things like that on there that we could authenticate to. It was an absolute gold mine, but a nice little find and a nice little lesson, I suppose, in things like segregation and stuff like that. Because you immediately, when you're doing the recommendations and like the remediations afterwards, you talk to the client, you say, well, why was it like this? And quite often it's just something they haven't thought about. They've just plugged in and forgotten about over time. It was there when they built the devices, they just unplugged it, yada, yada, yada. So these are good things to look out for. Just got to be careful with them. Obviously, on the flip side, like actual attackers are not going to care about rebooting something, but it's an interesting attack vector. One of the other interesting things we found on this test, the same test, I mentioned things like print servers and such. We also thought after we saw print servers, we got excited and we looked for printers because alongside NetBIOS, I also had a thing for printers. For quite a considerable
this is just going to be the innuendo episode, isn't it?
Yeah, we should do like a bingo card.
Andy has a thing for printers.
Yeah, we should do a bingo card.
All that Epson.
Oh, ink cannon. Yeah. So,
are you more of an inkjet or a laser man?
Oh, inkjet, I think. I mean, laserjet if you want like the quantity, but I mean inkjet if you like ink and sticky fingers, I guess, by replacing cartridges. It's not getting any better, is it? No, it's not. It's not. Do people buy printers still? Anyway, right, anyway, whatever. We're not talking about...
What kind of a question is that?
I was just thinking, I can't remember the last time personally at home I printed stuff. I can't remember. I did see I saw a picture, sorry, slightly off tangent. I saw a client sent me a picture of themselves. Fuck's sake, this is getting worse. A client sent me a picture of themselves the other day. Not like that.
Oh, I bet they did, Swift. I bet they did.
I was just checking in on them. I said, have you received a report yet? And they sent me this picture back going, yes, I've got it here. And they sent me a picture of them sitting cross-legged on their sofa with a printout of our pen testing report.
That's great.
All 600 pages of it on the side.
I love customers who have a sense of humor.
It's incredible. Yeah. But yeah, I guess that answers the question. My own question, I suppose. People do still use printers to print pen test reports. Weirdly,
yes. I prefer a laser printer because the toner just does not dry up or really run out.
That's the thing. Yeah.
So you spend a little extra of that money at the start, but that printer will last for like 10 years.
Ink cartridges are crazy expensive now, though, aren't they?
Yeah, toner isn't, and I mean it's expensive. But the why are we talking about printers?
I don't know.
I'm going to convince people they need a laser printer. Like if you've ever had the problem of changing cartridges and an inkjet or the ink even just drying up because you haven't used your printer in 2 years, like toner, laser printer, get one. They're so much better. It's worth the investment.
Any particular brand you'd recommend?
Brother is pretty good. I do like Brother branded printers.
Okay.
That's the only one I've ever had. So
this is clearly our area.
Reliable. I mean, it's reliable and it works, and they have quite a good selection. So yeah, that's as far as I'm a Brother man in terms of laser printers.
I've got a Canon upstairs, and it is ink powered, but it's largely because I panicked over Christmas and I had something to print off.
Panic bought a printer.
Yes. Well, more the situation is ridiculous because I had a bunch of things to print off for people because about 4 people I know asked for vouchers, like very specific vouchers. And these very specific vouchers come from companies that just don't send vouchers out in the post, like a physical thing. So I was like, I can't just give them an email. So I was like, I'll print something off. And I was like, my printer doesn't work anymore. That one I had because A, the ink all dried up. B, it's so old we can't find the ink cartridges stocked anywhere locally. And C, again, so old the drivers are not even supported anymore. So you can't, without a lot of mucking about, you can't get the drivers to work on any kind of system anymore, which is annoying. So I was like, I'm not going to spend hours doing that. Do what any other logical person would do. I'll just buy a new printer. So I bought a new printer for the specific purpose of printing off some gift vouchers. Ridiculous.
Wow.
I should add it only cost me about 30 quid for this new printer. It wasn't like a fancy one.
Yeah.
It was like bargain basement. So yeah, there we go. Right. Anyway, now we've had about a 20-minute diversion into the world of printers and toner. I was talking about...
Did you finish your story? I forget.
No.
Or did we just completely diverge?
It's because I was talking about print service. And so this is actually justified. I'm not going to talk about toner, but yeah, we did discover through the Lightsound interfaces and we got access to a load of actual print servers and things. But that led us to this weird world of going, I really like printers at the moment. I've got a thing for them. I like hunting them down because they're interesting places. As interesting as printers get, I suppose. You'd argue very interesting because we've just spent about 15 minutes chatting about it. But they store lots of information if you're not careful and you haven't configured your printers. And the thing is, a lot of organizations will just hire in a third party to bring in and connect up printers rather than just buying their own these days, like big industrial printers and things like that. But with that comes often a lack of people checking things like configuration and what they're doing. So when you scan a document in, where does that document go? Where does it get stored? Does it get moved anywhere? Like if you're just taking a copy of a passport, for example, like this company was on a regular basis, where do those copies of passports go and where do they get stored? So you had all of the office staff just willy-nilly just walking in, just copying things and taking printouts away, and then that was, as far as they're concerned, the end of a road. Of course, as far as we're concerned, not the end of a road, because all of these printers have default passwords on them. And as soon as you enter those default passwords on them, you can get to the printer's internal file storage, which stores the last 200 copies of whatever you've tried to scan. So we ended up with just this massive repository of just passports we could just extract from printers, literally through default administration credentials on these printers. So it's not a glamorous attack, but it's just, I suppose, one of those reminders of just don't forget the little things. Everyone goes after like the big vulnerabilities during tests, the big domain compromises, and sometimes we forget about those smaller things that are like, oh my god, there's like 20 printers around the network that are just keeping copies of everything they've scanned for anyone just to go and pick up across the network. And sometimes that disclosure of personal information might trump some of the other findings you're finding. So yeah, never leave those things out of tests. Never just breeze past them, because if you've done like a Nessus scan on the internal, those sorts of things always come up quite low down the list. They're not criticals in their own right, they're not highs or even mediums in their own right often. It's more a case of, oh yeah, by the way, I found a printer, and sort of the informational section right at the end. So yeah, don't ever overlook those things if you are doing an internal test soon. But there's lots to be found, lots of interesting stuff to be found in the most unexpected of places. Was that not like a Harry Potter thing?
I don't know.
Something, and where to find them. Fantastical beasts and where to find them. Yeah, so, no.
Fantastic printers and where to find them.
Yeah.
But that does remind me, though, I know that, so one of the, obviously, the things that companies do sometimes is they, with old equipment, they'll just sell it for cheap. Because, if you're getting something new, then you want to get some money back on your old stuff. And so they'll have these, like, business sort of equipment sales, and you can get some relatively good stuff. You can get like nice chairs for cheap. But I remember hearing years ago, like some company had replaced its printers and sold them, and the people who'd bought them found like a bunch of documents just stored on the internal sort of disk, because of course, and it was all confidential documents. So yeah, people got to be careful with selling old equipment, especially printers. Make sure you've like actually reset the damn things, so they aren't just have a massive data leak.
Yeah, well, there's a big hoo-ha about 2 years ago about cars and second-hand cars and the industry that sits in for similar sort of data purging reasons, because the smarter cars are getting, the more information we're storing internally on them. There's very quickly the second-hand car market has had to keep up with how to purge this data and prepare it for new users. Otherwise, there's been cases previously where people have just been sat in cars with like the previous owner's data all still on things like infotainment systems, like their addresses, recent navigated addresses, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, this sort of stuff repeats itself all over the place, doesn't it? Right.
It does.
Climax time, Tibsy.
All right.
Has anyone ever told you that before?
No comment.
We're going to have words with your girlfriend.
I've just labeled this one the worst web app. And this one has a backstory, and I need to explain the backstory because it's relatively important to how this story kind of ends. So this was a year or more ago, and I was assigned a 3-day web application test. And already that's a bit odd because, 3 days is not normal. We've talked about scoping before, and like, I'm a big proponent of like, we need to get rid of the whole 5-day web app pen test as a standard thing because I think it's dumb. I think, web apps are so complicated now. 5 days is just not enough time.
No.
So 3 days is already ridiculous. So I was expecting, and we were going to go into a customer call, not a scoping call, but like a logistics call. They were going to show me the application. And so they show the application, and my goodness, it's complicated. It was also production. All of my best stories are just finding stuff in production over here. So it was in production as well. And, it's multi-tenant, right? So it's the same web app, but multiple different organizations can log into the same web app and see their own stuff. And so I'm on this call and I'm sitting there going, how was this ever scoped at 3 days? And like after the call ends, I contact my manager and we're like, okay, we need to figure this out because this like a 3-day test is insane for this. And long story short, one of the salespeople messed up and thought they were being helpful and they really weren't. And we went back to the customer who already were like happy that they got a cheap pen test. And we said, yeah, we need more days. And they only allowed us one more day. So I had a 4-day pen test. Yeah. And the start date of this pen test was the Monday. End day was the Thursday. I had the Friday off because I was going on vacation. So it's not one of those tests where you can just be like, I'm not booked on anything on Friday. I can kind of just extend it into Friday if it's a decent test, right? Sometimes you can be a bit flexible and say, well, I'm not scheduled in anything. And this test, has been really productive and I want to be a really good, give a good test for the customer. So I'll just, spend some time on Friday and do it. Could not do that. Had literally a Monday to Thursday deadline for this test. So to say, I was in obviously a time bind, and I also just kind of wanted to find, so like, obviously, whenever you do a test, you want to find everything. You want to find all the cool stuff. And so you go into any test thinking I'm going to find everything. And sometimes you're just massively disappointed because there's nothing there or there's a few things there. But to say that I had sort of like a vendetta against this particular app just because I was like annoyed that I only had 4 days, that's kind of an understatement. I was like just extra focused because I had to be, because I was on such a time limit. And my goodness, did I find everything. Like almost every kind of web app vulnerability you can think of, this application was vulnerable to. There was a cross-site scripting at some point. There was some SQL injection. There were authorization issues just galore. So there were like different roles you could assign users within your organization, and there was almost no access control. So you could be like a really low read-only level user and set stuff. You could have idle, right? So even though this was multi-tenant, you could, as one tenant, just access another tenant's stuff.
Excellent.
And they were just using numeric IDs. They weren't using UUIDs, which, for anyone listening, even if you're using UUIDs, you have to implement access control. UUIDs is not an access control thing. I think Joseph Thacker has a Res Zero. I think he is online. He has a good article about that. UUIDs are not access control. But they weren't using UUIDs. They were just using regular numeric IDs, so you could just increment or decrement the value. And lo and behold, here's another organization stuff. And I think the final count was like 6 criticals or something ridiculous and like 18 highs. It was stupid for a test. But the best finding, and bear in mind, this was on the 4th day, and it was late at night. I've been having so much fun that I swear, I was working like 12-hour days just because it was hilarious. And I didn't even mind. But I remember it was like, I think it was 9 p.m. at night, and I had to pack because I was going on vacation the next day.
You hadn't packed yet.
No.
Excellent.
But I tested so much stuff, but I hadn't tested the login yet, because I tend to test the login last, and that's for a reason. That's because sometimes when you're testing a login, you'll accidentally lock your account, and sometimes there isn't a good unlock policy, and you have to like message the customer and everything, and it's just a whole thing. So I tend to test anything to do with like login authentication last. So I was like, well, I'm going to test the authentication. I'll do some basic stuff, user enumeration, right? So I'll type in an invalid username, with obviously an invalid password and see if it says, hey, that username doesn't exist. And then you type in a real username with an invalid password and see if it, is there any difference between the error messages? And well, there wasn't a difference. Like, there wasn't user enumeration. But I looked at the requests, and I specifically looked at the request where there was a valid username and an invalid password. The way this application did authentication, it had like a JSON object that responded with like a status code. And if the status was okay, there'd be another, like, here's the JWT access token, right? And it would deliver that. And so I had a valid username, invalid password. The status code was something like, like error or something. It was something weird because obviously that's not a valid login.
Yeah.
The JWT field had a JWT in it.
Huh?
And it was valid.
Oh, oh, excellent.
I copied it. And I was like, wait a minute. That's not right. This is an invalid password for my user. Why is there a JWT here? So I copied it into like Repeater and put it in a request that I knew required authentication. And it worked.
Oh.
And at that point, it's like 10 p.m. Right. So because I've been testing for like an hour on authentication, doing various things. It's 10 p.m. and I went into hysterics. And that is not an understatement. Okay, I don't mind admitting this. I fucking burst out laughing, and I was laughing hysterically in my office for 10 full minutes. I just completely lost it because like it's the most insane thing I've ever seen on a web app. Like, you have a login which has one job, which is to give a session token when you have the correct username and the correct password. And it was just giving session tokens if you knew a username. And that broke me. I was doing so good on that test. I was finding everything. I was having such a fun time. That just broke me. I swear to God, I'm not exaggerating. People will think I'm just lying or exaggerating. I laughed really hard for 10 full minutes. I just kept going into like laughing hysterics because I was just like that. What a way to end the test is to find that you don't even need a password for this damn thing.
You might say
it just gives you the session token, and it was just so funny, and it was just because it was also like 10 p.m. I've been working for so long, I still had to pack, but like. That was the final finding on my test was, oh, by the way, you don't do authentication properly.
And that was you climaxing for 10 minutes.
Yeah, pretty much. So yeah, it was just
how do you?
There's never going to be a test greater than that one. Everything was just awful at the start because I had so little time to test the entire application, and then it was just like I found everything, like absolutely everything.
It's just one of those things where you tell it to people and they're like, "Nah, that sounds like a lab environment," but. Because think, I mean, you've developed applications before. You'd have to go out your way to make that mistake, to make that. This is what I can't fathom sometimes when you see stuff, when you hear things like this. Like, if you've developed any kind of application with authentication controls of any sort, you know how ridiculously hard it is to get to this stage where this is the situation. Like, there's some vulnerabilities where if you start off in cybersecurity and you do web app testing and then you then go back and then create web apps, which is, I don't think, the way around to do it, by the way. But if you do that and you do suddenly start developing applications and then you suddenly realize how easy some of these mistakes actually are to make as you go along, you can, or at least you can get an appreciation for, that's how people have fucked up that. And that's how that works its way into my cybersecurity life. But things like that, You'd have to go out of your way to code something like that. It's just, it beggars belief. But man, did you make it to holiday?
I did.
Oh, you did.
I had a great time.
Oh, you had a great time. That's good.
I should say as well, because I imagine people listening like going, well, didn't a customer ever type their password in wrong and just get a get a session. So it was like a JavaScript based login form, and so because the status in the JSON was error, it would never, if you just tried like typing a valid username with an invalid password in the actual login, it would still reject you. It would still be like invalid login. But so the only reason I found this is because I was like looking at the responses and noticed, okay, status error, but a session token, and then was able to like replay requests. So yeah, it was one of those weird things where like you couldn't find this if you were just randomly typing usernames and stupid passwords into the application window. You had to actually be observing the responses. But yeah,
it's absurd.
It was so good. It was like I said,
climax.
Probably the greatest test I've ever done, and it was on such a time crunch, and the report was ridiculous.
Greatest climax you've ever had, you could say.
I'm not going to say that, but
well, I will. Don't you worry.
It was pretty good. I'll say that. Oh. Yeah, we should do another one of these episodes. So I'm sure we have way more. I know I have more stories.
Yeah, I've got some pretty interesting incident response ones to work in that didn't seem like the time and place. So
no, we'll definitely do another one. Yeah,
bizarre.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for listening. I've been Tib3rius. He's been Andy Swift. This has been Across the Pondcast. You can find all of our social media links in the episode description or on acrossthepondcast.net. We will see you next time.
Hope you climax soon.